again! No, e wait, tu!
Ciao a tutti, benvenuti, bla bla bla.
I want to scream, why now? Thank you. We need to be polite. This is the beginning. The beginning. That's it. Yay! Hi, hello. Welcome to the Human Map. I'm Giorgia and I'm speaking to you from Craiova, Romania. I'm currently here as a volunteer for the European Solidarity Corps for the project Inclusivity Unlocked 3. This experience has made me realize how often we view reality through a single lens. But being here in a place with different stories cross paths, I've learned that there is just one way to look at geopolitics. In this podcast, we aren't going to talk about the usual geopolitics of military move. I want to take you on a journey to understand how the big decision can reach actually our street, affecting the life of ordinary people and the most vulnerable community. In our episode, we will explore some fascinating topics. We will try to understand why the old alliances are cracking, and we will look into the shadow zone where corruption and crime act as invisible power. But we will also talk about the future, about digital democracy, and how each of us, with our own tradition and daily resistance, is rewriting the map of the world. My approach, it's very simple. We will start with what we know, the music that we listen, the app we use, and then dive into the deeper level of global power. But today, let's start with a big question. Who really rules the world today? We are about to discover how power is shifting away from Europe and America toward the East and how global leadership is changing. And we can actually start. So, with a small exercise. Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second and just think about this question. If you had to point to the center of the world on a map right now, where would your finger land? For most of the 20th century, the answer was almost automatic. Washington, D.C., the United States. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, America stood alone at the top. One superpower, one model, one center. This is what political scientists call a unipolar moment. But here's the thing about moments, they end. Political scientists who study the history of global power argue that American unipolarity was never a permanent condition. It was an illusion, a historical anomaly that men in Washington mistook for a new natural order. The core idea is this: power always balances power. When one state becomes too dominant, others start feeling threatened, even if that dominant state claims to be acting in the name of democracy, freedom, or stability. History shows again and again that no country, no matter how powerful or how good it believes itself to be, get to rule the world forever. And the challenge to American dominance didn't come with weapons. It came through what scholars called economic pre-balancing. Countries like China understood that to challenge the hegemon, you don't start with tanks. You start with the factories, technology, with financial institutions. You close the economic gap first, and once the economic gap is closed, political power follows. This is why the real battle today is not on a battlefield somewhere. It's being fought over markets, investments, and digital infrastructure. There is another concept that we like, the leash slipping. States that were once loyal followers start building their own capabilities, making their own decision, they slip the leash. And once enough countries do this, the world stop looking like a single center map and start looking like a mosaic of fighting voices. But here is where it gets really interesting for us in 2025, because this transition from a unipolar world to a multipolar one is not just playing out in foreign minister and boardrooms. It is actually playing out in your phone. It's playing out in your headphones. It's playing out every time you open TikTok. Think about it. Not long time ago, if you wanted global cultural influence, you needed Hollywood. You needed the BBC. Cultural power and military economic power were inseparable. Center of culture was the same at the center of everything else, the West. That is no longer true. Because let's talk about the South Korea. South Korea is a country of about 50 million people. It does not have nuclear weapons. It is not member of the Security Council. By traditional measure of hard power, is it a medium-sized nation living in the shadow of much larger neighborhood. Yet today, South Korean culture, K-pop, K-drama, Korean food, Korean beauty is generally global. How this has happened? After a devastating financial crisis in the late 1990s, South Korea government made a strategic decision: invest in culture. Think of it as a national project. They studied Hollywood business model. They create training academies for artists. They build entertainment companies designed not just to make music, but to export a craft image of South Korea to the world. Modern, democratic, vibrant, cool. This is what political science called soft power, the ability to influence others through attraction rather than coercion. Like, not do this or I will punish you, but just maybe you will like this. Why? Don't you want to be like this? But here is where the story gets more complicated, because if K-pop spread across the globe, it did so largely through one platform, TikTok. TikTok is not Korean, TikTok is Chinese. TikTok changed the rule in the soft power game. Before TikTok, virality was controlled. To become a global star, you need gatekeepers, TV station, studio, mostly American. What it means? That for the first time, the most powerful cultural distribution algorithm in the world is not Silicon Valley, it is in Beijing. For years, there have been debates about banning TikTok in United States. Why? Not just because of data privacy fears, but because of something deeper. The fear that China can use the algorithm to shape the opinion, values, and worldviews of Western youth. Scholars call this sharp power. The sharp power is influence that is not soft and attracting like K-pop, but sharp and invisible, operating through information system rather than culture. Here is the fascinating paradox, because while governments panic about TikTok as a geopolitical weapon, hundreds of millions of users experience it as the most authentic space on the internet. Cooking videos, dance trend, daily life, people sharing their own reality. We found ourselves in this fascinating, unsettling moment. The center of the map is shifting. Soft power is the new battlefield, and the weapons are algorithm, fan communities. So we'll talk about culture and soft power, but I want to go a level deeper now, because when we talk about who rules the world, we also have to talk about infrastructure, about the invisible architecture that makes the modern world function. Here is a question, an important one. What actually is sovereignty in the 21st century? For most of history, the answer was simple. Country is sovereign when it controls its territory, when it can defend its border, when it has an army strong enough to deter its enemies. There is the traditional definition of power going back centuries. But today, the definition is completely insufficient because there are other kind of territory, invisible territory. And let me give you 3 examples. The first one, the internet cables under the sea. Almost nobody think about this, but the global internet is not wireless, physical. It runs on hundreds of thousands of kilometers of undersea cables sitting on the ocean floor, connecting every continent. This cable carry the vast majority of all international internet traffic. Every email, every financial transaction, every piece of data your company sent to its headquarters in another country, it travels through these cables. Who owns them? Who can access them? Who decide where they are built? These are not just technical questions, they are a question of geopolitical power, because the control over undersea cables mean the ability to monitor, disrupt, or even sever the communication of entire nation. The second example is the lithium, cobalt, and rare earth element. We are living through an energy transition. The world is moving away from fossil fuel and toward electric vehicles, renewable energy, and battery storage. This transition requires minerals. Lithium for batteries, cobalt for electric motors, rare earth elements for the magnet inside wind turbines and electric cars. These minerals are not evenly distributed across the globe. They are concentrated in a specific place, often in the global south. And whoever controls the mining, the processing, and the supply chain for this material control the future of global economy. Researchers who study the geopolitics of energy are clear on this point. The energy transition does not eliminate geopolitical dependency, it reshapes it. We are moving from dependency on country with the oil fields to dependency on country with lithium deposit and battery factory. Third example, it's Taiwan and the microchip. You have probably heard about the chip shortage in the early 2020 when car manufacturers and electronic companies couldn't get enough semiconductor and have to shut down production line. That crisis revealed something that most people had never thought about before. The most advanced computer chips in the world, the tiny processor that run our smartphone, our AI system, our military equipment, are almost entirely made by a single company in a single place, just one. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. This is what geopolitical calls the Silicon Shield. Taiwan's security is guaranteed not primarily by its military, but by the fact that both America and China need this technology. If Taiwan were to be invaded or chip production disrupt, the global technology supply chain will collapse. Both superpowers know this, so the island sits in this extraordinary geopolitical position protected by its own irreplaceability. But this balance is now under intense pressure because the United States, of course, has been pressuring TSMC to build manufacturing plants on American soil and is investing billions of dollars to construct factory in Arizona. This is not just about business, it is about the United States deciding that depending on an island 90 miles from China, is a national security risk. Today is not just about where what your borders are drawn on a map. It is about where you place your supply chain, who you depend on for your energy, who controls the cable that carry your data. The new wars, the new imperial project are fought over these invisible dependencies. Now, third part. Okay, so we traveled from soft power and culture to undersea cable and microchips. Now I want to zoom out to the big political picture because all of this change, this transition from unipolar to multipolar world is eventually codified into institution, into rules, into the formal architecture of global governance. And here is the fundamental tension of our moment. The institutions that currently govern the world were built by the West, for the West, after 1945. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. These are not natural bodies. They reflect the power dynamics of the post-World War II era, when Europe and United States were the dominant forces in the global economy. For decades, this meant that the rule of international trade, the condition attached to developing loans, the standard for everything from financial regulation to human rights, all of it was written primarily by Western powers. The global South had very little say, and this was not incidental. Research on developing economics describe in detail how developing countries were pressured for decades to adopt so-called structural adjustment programs imposed by International Monetary Fund. But something shifted. And the turning point was in 2003 in Cancun. The World Trade Organization held a ministerial conference there, and the United States and European Union arrived with a proposal that essentially locked in their enormous agriculture subsidies while pushing developing nations to open their markets. It was the same old story: liberation for others, protection for ourselves. And for the first time, a coalition of developing nations said no. Led by Brazil and India, a group of countries that will become known as the G20 of developing nations, form a unified negotiation bloc. Was not just the political protest. They built a coalition that united the interests of large agriculture exporters with those of poor food insecure nation, which sounds impossible, but they did it. Together, they represented more than half the world population and two-thirds of all the world farmers. This was a preview of what was coming, a world where the global south was no longer content to accept deals made for them by others. And then came the BRICS. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is no longer a talking shop for emerging economies. This is the beginning of an alternative institutional architecture for the world. What do I mean? The BRICS are not just protesting against the existing order, they are building a parallel one. They have created the new development bank, often called the BRICS Bank, which provide development financing without the crushing political and economic condition attached to International Monetary Fund loans. They are actively pushing for de-dollarization. It's conducting more trade between member states in their own currencies, rather than the US dollar. This reduced their vulnerability to American financial sanction, a lesson learned when Russia was cut off from the global financial system after the invasion of Ukraine. Now, I want to be honest here. The BRICS alliance has structural problem because its members have different political system from democracy to authoritarianism. They have competing interests and territorial disputes. India and China, for example, have fought over the border. Building a current alternative to Western institution out of this complexity is generally difficult. But the direction is clear. Let me also spend a moment on a topic that I think it's often overlooked in this big geopolitical discussion. There are the small states. Because one of the most interesting thing about our multipolar moment is it has actually created new opportunity for countries that were previously invisible in global politics. Political theory has developed what is sometimes called shelter theory to explain how small states survive and even thrive in international politics. The core insight is simple. Small states cannot guarantee their own security or economic prosperity on their own. They need shelter from larger states, from international organizations, from multilateral institutions. But here is the key twist. Globalization and the proliferation of international institutions have changed the game for small states. In multilateral forums where rules apply equally to everyone, a small country with good diplomacy and a focused strategy can punch it far above its weight. It can specialize, becoming the world expert in conflict mediation or climate policies or human rights law. Think of country like Costa Rica, which has no military, but is respected globally for its environmental leadership. Small states have always found a way to survive. But in a multipolar world with more institutions and more competing powers, their room to maneuver actually expands. When the big powers are fighting each other, the small states can build coalition, mediate, and carve out space for their own priorities. This is to me the real meaning of multipolarity, not just China competing with America, but a world where the rules are written by a generally broader table. So, who rules the world today? The honest answer is nobody completely, but also more people than ever. The unipolar moment, it's over. We have to say it, that the United States is still the most powerful single country on earth, but it is no longer the architect of everyone else's choices. China has built a parallel system. The global south is demanding a seat at the table. Increasingly is getting one. What does this mean for us? For ordinary people? For a community like the one I'm living here in Craiova or the one you live in? I think it means that the world is more complicated and more interesting than the single story we were told. Is it a constant negotiation, contest every day in parliament, in music video, in the decision of small states, and in the choices of young people on what they see and what they share? That is what the Human Map is for. Thank you so much for joining me for this first episode. I hope you like it. I hope you enjoy it. Also, I want to ask sorry for the change of environment, setting, outfit, no paper, nothing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Next time we are going to go deeper and also to explore other topics. That's it. Keep looking at the map and see you here for the next episode. Ciao, ciao, ciao!